In the Big Ten on the defensive line, size matters. Let's talk about why that has the Badgers feeling good about this upcoming season.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day. I'm your host, Ryan Herrings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for tuning in and being a part of this community. Appreciate the absolute heck out of all of y'all. Today's episode, we are talking defensive line, why the size matters this year, depth chart, positional grades, what's coming down the pipeline. First, thank you for making this one of your first listens. Thank you for being an everydayer. Today's episode brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers get 150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Okay, let's get into it. You know, like Godzilla or King Kong found out when he was dealing with Godzilla, man, size matters. You can't replicate it. When you need it, you need it. And quite frankly, you need it in the Big Ten. You need it when you're playing Iowa, when you're playing Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, Illinois now, Minnesota, sadly. You're going to need it out of conference playing Bama. You look at last year's depth chart, and you had just had a couple guys on this roster that were 300 plus. You had Brendan Lane, you had Barton, you had who else did you have last year? And you had Jamal Howard, who really didn't play. This year, you got 6 or 7 bodies that are 300 plus. You have those guys, and those guys have gotten bigger and stronger. Barton went from 308 last year to 323 this year. But you're also adding in a Perkins. You're adding in a Parker Peterson. You're adding in a Xavier Ponu. This is a much, much bigger defensive line. And when you talk to some players that I've been able to talk to, or some coaches, or even some offensive linemen, when I was able to come down and watch practice, I talked to Jake Renfro. And Jake Renfro is not somebody he's not a man of many words. He's pretty direct, succinct, and pretty truthful. And he said bigger, stronger, fast, just bigger, stronger, tougher when talking about the defensive line. And who better to talk on it than the guys blocking those players? You know, you talk to just some of the other people in the room. They're very excited about the size and the numbers on the defensive line this year, just going from where they were last year. And we talked about this a bunch, right? It's kind of the chicken and the egg. Why isn't Tressel adjusting more? Why aren't we playing more defensive linemen? But maybe he doesn't have them. He's got more this year. There's no excuses this year. He's going to have to be able to mix and match the right pieces. But they have some size this year. The other part about this, and we're continuing our post-spring depth chart, just kind of our positional preview. So this is the defensive line. We've done all the offensive side. We'll do edge next and inside linebacker, et cetera, et cetera. But the one thing to point out with this defense is it is a little hard to draw the line between who is a defensive lineman, who is an edge guy. I'm just going to go off the Wisconsin roster. That's what I'm going to use. And that has guys like Corey Walker and Garner listed as outside linebackers, but those are 300-pounders too. So just the theme of size, it extends beyond the defense line. Daryl Peterson put on 20 pounds. You have Walker and Garner, who we're not even going to talk about on this show, but they absolutely will have their hand in the dirt at times playing the edge and kind of controlling the line of scrimmage, handling a tight end, turning plays to the inside. But you just look at this defensive line, and they are deeper and they are bigger. Are they better? Yeah, I think so, because last year's defense line was pretty bad, quite frankly. I do think they're better this year, and I do think they're deeper. And I think you saw a tendency in games last year for this defense to falter a little bit, right? Take a couple punches and then start to run out of steam. That's not always a want-to thing. That's not always a guys quit thing. Sometimes it's just we don't got enough bodies. We talk about it all the time. You need at least 2 groups, 2 waves of defensive linemen, and the really good teams have 3. You know, the really good teams have 6, 7, 8 deep, and they just rotate them through with defense line because you have to. You needed to be able to play against the bigger, more physical teams on the schedule. They couldn't do that last year. Time will tell if they can this year, but at least they have the bodies to. Time is going to tell if the bodies are good enough, but at least they have the bodies to this year. Let's go into some of that depth chart a little bit. Seniors, you got Ben Barton coming back. You got Brandon Lane coming back. JVR Suggs is a new addition from the transfer portal. So let's get to know some of these names. JVR Suggs is coming in from LSU. Didn't play a ton there, but we talked about it, posted some pretty good PFF numbers, showed some explosiveness. He's just a tick under 300, but he is an interesting guy. You have Parker Peterson coming from Tulane. On the junior side, you have Charles Perkins, kind of the talk of spring. You know, maybe the best thing about Perkins that we don't really talk about a lot is you have him for potentially 2 years. And I say potentially because you never know anymore. but potentially you've got big Perk for 2 years, or he balls out this year and he goes to the league. Then sophomore, you got Dylan Johnson, who played last year as a true freshman. Again, you start to think some of these pieces. That's a guy who had to play as a true freshman. He had a wrestling background, pretty good commit. Now he's a little bigger and stronger. That's a guy who could blow up a little bit this year and next year. You have Jamel Howard, who started to turn some eyes, finally maybe unlocking some of that potential. And that's a spot I want to pause on too, because people have kind of written Jamel Howard off. He's a redshirt sophomore. I mean, 5 years ago, 6, 7 years ago, 10 years ago, you would have never even expected a redshirt sophomore to play right away. There's very few Keanu Bentons in the world who, the moment they step on campus, they walk out of their high school cafeteria, they take the Uber to Madison, they walk on campus, and they're the best defensive lineman when they get there. That's a rare dude. That's why he's in the league. He's getting paid at the professional level to play football. Keanu Benton's rare. Dylan Johnson played as a true freshman last year too. Jamel Howard is only a redshirt sophomore. These guys still have size. They've always had the size and some of the physical tools. It'd be interesting to see if some of those light bulbs start to kick on. And then as freshmen, we're going to talk about freshmen next, but you have Torin Petaway and Xavier Uponu and Drayden Pavey as well. Let's talk some of the projected 2 deep here. What are we thinking for starters, for backups? Because again, it doesn't matter. It almost doesn't matter. I shouldn't say it doesn't matter, but it almost doesn't matter how good your front line is if you have no depth on the defensive line. You need a couple waves of guys. So I think Charles Perkins is obviously going to be him. He's been talked about a ton. He's been talked about by people who have watched practice. He's been talked about by other players. He's been talked about by coaches. They've highlighted him. He has a ton of energy. He is big. He's pretty explosive. I think the Badgers maybe got a massive portal steal with Charles Perkins. Now we got to see. But he made a lot of plays in spring and he's turned heads. I think there's one of your anchor guys. He's going to play a ton of snaps. He's going to be a starter. He's going to be one of your anchor guys. Charles Perkins, pencil him into that very heavy rotation in the ones. I think a guy like Parker Peterson is going to play a lot in that top group. And I think Ben Barton is going to play quite a bit. Ben Barton's a guy that coaches have talked pretty highly of big, physical, mature guy who's just going to do what you need him to do. Not overly explosive, but he's about 325 pounds now, really good size. And again, for a team that struggled so much stopping the run last year, you get a guy like Barton back and he goes from 308 last year to 325 this year. I think he's going to play a lot. And then in that second group, right, you have a Dylan Johnson, who I talked about. Dylan Johnson played as a true freshman last year. He's also gotten bigger. Former wrestling background, a guy that I was really excited about coming in. He's going to be, his first full now off season in the program. I would watch him. Put a marker with Dylan Johnson, see how he looks this year. JDR Suggs, we talked about. I think Suggs is a part-time guy. I think he's an interior pass rusher type, just a tick under 300 pounds, but pretty quick and twitchy. Was at LSU last year. I think he's going to play in kind of a situational spot, but a situational spot where when you need disruptive plays, he could be that guy. Don't forget Jamel Howard and Brandon Lane that we talked about. Both over 300 pounds. They look like the light bubble's starting to come on for Howard a little bit. So there's some pieces here. I don't know if any of the freshmen are going to play. I think Xavier Uponu has the body type to do it, but I just think there's enough bodies in front of him. And again, we haven't even talked about the Corey Walkers or the Michael Garners. That'll be on the next preview. But that's kind of what you're looking at. I think you're going to see a massive dose of Perkins, Peterson, Barton, and then you're going to mix in Suggs, Howard, Dylan Johnson. That might be your 2 deep with kind of the core defensive line group. I'm really excited about these guys. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to talk about the future next. What's in the pipeline? Who are we really excited about? And then get into some superlatives later on Locked On Badgers. But first, a quick break for our friends of the show. Quick second to say thank you for tuning in as always. Today's episode brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel is phenomenal. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, which I love baseball, I am all about that, or whether it's golf on the green, high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to get in on the action and make it more exciting. Right now, if you're already following all the action, why not make it a little more thrilling? Live in-game bettings, access to every type of bet you want, parlays, futures, spreads, teasers, it's all there. And you can get into it with your friends while getting sunburned on the beach because they have a mobile app that's incredible to use, really, really easy. I use FanDuel all the time. Same-game parlays are incredible. They're fun, and you get quick payouts when you make the hits. Right now, if you're new to FanDuel, new customers get $5. If you bet $5, you get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. Okay, let's get into the future. Let's get into the pipeline. What's coming up next for the Badgers? What do they got down on the farm, which is a baseball term, but we were just talking about baseball, so it works for me. Let's talk about some of the future guys. So you have Ernest Willard Jr., he was a massive get, a cycle ago, 4-star player, and it just feels like they've been trying to. The name that pops in my head, and they're different types of players, and this doesn't necessarily mean that this is his career track, but the name that pops in my head a little bit is Arrington Farrar, where they just kind of kept trying to find the right spot for him. Arrington Farrar was a 4-star safety, but he was a little too big for safety, but not big enough for linebacker. It feels like with Ernest Willard, they're trying to figure out what he is, right? Is he a guy that's going to be an outside linebacker, a defensive lineman? Is he going to drop into space? Is he just going to have his hand in the dirt? He still has those physical tools. He's about 245 right now, 250, 240, somewhere in that range. Good get off, strong, really wants to do well. He's a hard worker, and he's still just a redshirt freshman. So let's see where it goes. But it feels to me like they're trying to find where he fits. Do I think he's going to play a big role this year in Ernest Willard Jr.? I don't. I think they brought in enough from the portal. They brought in enough upperclassmen from the portal that are already physically developed. I don't know if I see a path for playing time for him this year. And much like the Jamel Howard conversation that I had, where the portal has sped up our expectations for players, that's similar to Ernest Willard Jr. It feels like people are already starting to write him off a little bit. I wouldn't do that. All the physical skills that made him a 4-star player, that made him a big get, are still there. It just feels like they're trying to find the perfect spot for him and find the perfect fit for his skill set. So I don't think you'll see him a ton this year, but I wouldn't write him off. Xavier Ukponu, going to be a true freshman this year. Big bodied kid, really like him. I think if you were in last year's position, if this defensive line and front seven were in the spot that they were in last year, where you needed a Dylan Johnson to almost play right away, I think you could play a Xavier Ukponu right away if you needed him. But I don't think he's going to, because I think they have enough depth. The future for me for him isn't. I don't think he's a huge upside guy, but I think he has a really high floor. I think he's going to be a run stuffer with some penetration ability. Definitely a rotational guy with the potential to be a really solid starter. Which, man, as a defensive lineman, if you're trying to find that on the portal, that's an incredibly expensive piece. Ukpona was one of my more underrated guys in the class last year. I really like him. I like the body. I like the frame. I like the burst. I just don't think you're going to see him this year. Next, Jalen Williams. Let's talk about Jalen Williams. Jalen Williams was a monster pickup in last year's cycle. Monster pickup. Flipped him from Michigan. 4-star guy. Huge frame. Kind of reminded me of like if you think of the frame of like a DeForest Buckner, like just big arms, long arms, big frame, moves well, violent at the point of attack. He's got burst. He can move down the line of scrimmage. I think this is a potential future NFL guy. He has a ton of upside. Playing this year, I don't think so. I think he needs to still put on some weight. There is some rawness in his game. I think he's eventually going to be like a 3-tech, something like that, and he's going to have to put on 10, 20 pounds. So I don't think he's necessarily going to play this year, but man, do I love the upside. Absolutely love the upside with Jalen Williams. Think he could be a star for this team. Think he could be the type of, quite frankly, the type of defensive lineman that Wisconsin doesn't get very often. Wisconsin needs to get more of. He is a potential star. I don't think we'll see him this year, though. My biggest question for him, I think, is really just what it looks like when he gets a little bigger and what position he's going to end up at. But I think he has a tremendous amount of upside. Drayden Pavey, another piece in last year's class, liked him, and another big-bodied guy. They flipped him from Purdue. Again, I just don't think any of these guys are really going to play this year, because I don't think they're going to be needed with the depth that this team has brought in. We talked earlier about the 6-7 guys that are on the defensive line, and they're all upperclassmen, right? They're all sophomores or above. And that's, again, not even counting some of those bigger edge guys and the Petersons and the Gardners and the Walkers. This is a great spot to be in. This is where you want to be, right? You want to have the maturity on your roster and the optionality on your roster where you can let these younger defensive linemen, where Dylan Johnson doesn't have to play right away, where he can just grow and sit and get better and not use a year of eligibility, which, again, I don't think that's the biggest deal anymore. But you want to be in a position where you play freshmen because they're stars. You don't want to be in a position where you play freshmen or redshirt freshmen because you have to. I think the Badgers, with the bodies they brought in the portal and some of the pieces they got back last year, are back in that position. So that's a good thing. biggest potential surprise this year among the youngest. I'm going to go back to a point I made earlier. I think it could be Jamel Howard. Jamel Howard finally looks like it's starting to click. Now, when he came in, he was a guy that Miami was after, a bunch of other schools were after. He was a late add to that cycle, but you could see the physical size with movement skills. 300 plus, he could move. A couple schools really liked him as an interior disruptive guy. I thought he could be kind of a zero tech, kind of that guy that you line up over the center, and he can just really collapse an interior run game. I thought he had that type of potential for the Badgers. I think he still does, right? He's a redshirt sophomore, and we started to see him make some plays. When I was watching practice, I saw him make a couple plays in a row, and say, "Okay, this is what we were excited about. This is the type of tool set we were excited about." And does it need to be a lot? It doesn't. Like if Howard can give you 10 snaps a game, 20 snaps a game, 15 snaps one game, and maybe you go play a team that spreads you out more and you don't need his body type. But against an Iowa, if he can give you 10 or 15 snaps a game, okay. Because next year you're going to lose, Parker, you're going to lose Barton, you're going to lose some pieces. Well, now maybe Howard, if he can get his feet wet this year, maybe next year as a redshirt junior, he's really stepping into that role. So I'm really excited to see Jamel Howard. Let's grade the position now. So went through all the players. Let's grade the position. I'm giving it, and this might sound a little harsh considering what I just kind of ran through. A lot of players I'm high on, future players I'm excited about, but I'm going to call this C+. I think this group is a C+, which again, a C+ is better than average. It's solid, right? What would you grade last year's group? A D, D-? Maybe not that. If not for Elijah Hills, gosh, what would you grade that group? And Elijah Hills, for all the penetration he had and all of his ability to be disruptive, he still got washed out in the run game. So C+ going from where you were last year, I think is a big deal. If you can get to solid with this defensive line. And the reason I'm saying C+ is a lot of the younger talent is unproven. I think you need to be careful banking on that. I like the young talent, but it's unproven. And portal guys are tough to project. We're counting on a lot of portal additions this cycle, right? We're counting on Perkins. We're counting on Parker. We're counting on Suggs. We're counting on a lot of pieces that have been brought in the portal. And Wisconsin has been burned. They were burned at linebacker and at receiver in the last couple cycles from the portal, counting on guys that just didn't develop. They've been burned in a couple spots. So I think to me, it's a lot of pieces I like, but it's a lot of pieces that we don't fully know for sure how they're going to play. We don't know for sure if they're going to produce. So I'm going to say C+ on that, which, just to go back to it, if you were a D- last year and you're C+ this year, that's going in the right direction. And that keeps you more competitive. It keeps running games. It dampens the other team's ability to run the ball, which puts them in more passing situations, which opens up your passing attack or pass rushing attack, I should say. So that would be a big jump to me. Could they get to a B, B-, B+? I think they could get to a B. I think if Perkins is who we think he is, and some of these other pieces progress, like Dylan Johnson takes a step, Barton's a little better this year. I think this team right now, to me, is a C+ defensive line with the potential to get to like a B-, B. I don't know if I would go above that because I don't know if there's, outside of Perkins, I don't know if there's any players next year that are going to be impact guys, like big time impact players at the Big Ten level. I think you have a lot of really solid pieces and Charles Perkins potentially. Now, down the road, I think a guy like Jalen Williams could be that, but I don't know if I expect him to be that for a year or two. So I'm going to say C+ with the ability to get to a B-, B. Let me know in the chat what you guys think defensive line grades. All right, we'll take a quick second here. We're going to get into some superlatives. Plus, who is your favorite Badgers defensive lineman ever? We're going to do that next on Locked On Badgers as we wrap up the post-spring edition defensive line preview right here. All right, as always, man, appreciate everybody tuning in, making this one of the best communities for Badger fans to hang out, to get smarter, to have community. Really do appreciate all of y'all so much on that. All right, let's talk superlatives. So let's start here with my first superlative, which is biggest NFL upside among these defensive linemen. It's Jalen Williams, I think. Maybe Perkins. Perkins I did think about, but I think it's Jalen Williams just because he has the type of frame and size and athletic ability to be put on the edge. And where do teams draft high for defensive linemen? It's not always interior guys, which is what Perkins is going to be. It's edge. Everybody's looking for the next DeMarcus Ware, the next Bosa, the next fill in the blank, Von Miller, whoever the next edge guy is. Everybody's looking for that. And I'm not saying Jalen Williams is going to be any of those, but man, his upside is undeniable. Talking to some scouts that watched him play, watching the film, seeing his offer list, that's such a home run addition for the Badgers. So biggest NFL upside, Jalen Williams. Biggest X factor for me, it's Charles Perkins. Perkins has, and again, I'm just talking defensive line here. Someone might say, well, man, what about Reiger? I think Reiger, to me, is on the edges, which I'm going to do on a different show. So for me, Perkins has the ability to transform the middle of this defense, but he's got to prove it. He's got to show he can do it at this level. He's got to show he can live up to the hype that the reporters and coaches and other players have talked about. If that's the case, if he can be that guy, and just be with me for a second here, Badger fans, if he can be that guy, he gives you that piece that keeps those linebackers free. He gives you that piece that can't be moved against an Iowa. He gives you that piece that really clogs up the middle for the first time for a Badgers defense in a while. And that is going to open up Allegro. It's going to open up Tackett Curtis. It's going to open up so much for this team. Perkins is my X factor. I cannot wait to watch him play this year. Biggest reason for optimism, I talked about, it's the size. It's a quantifiable increase in big-bodied human beings. Like, it's as simple as that, man. Like, sometimes it's not more complicated than we added more big people, and we needed more big people, and we have more big people to put on the defensive line now. To me, that's it. That's the biggest reason for optimism. I don't think they're going to get worn down. I think they're going to have enough size to at least be physical enough to contend with the Big Ten offensive linemen that they're going to have to deal with week in and week out. That's a big deal. That's a massive deal for this team, who last year got washed out, got bullied, got beaten up, got kicked around, got blown out, got torn apart in the trenches. I think they have enough size this year where not only are they going to not, is that not going to happen? I think they could do that to some teams where they could physically beat on them. Biggest reason for concern, to me, it's the lack of star power potentially. I don't know. I like the size. I like the depth. I like the numbers. Who are the difference makers? When you line up against Minnesota and it's 3rd and 4 and you need a defensive lineman to make a play, is there anybody you can point on this defensive line? You say, I know that guy could be that guy. I think we hope it's going to be Perkins. He's got to prove it at this level. He's jumping up a level. I don't think it's going to be Parker Peterson coming over from Tulane. I don't know if it's going to be a guy like Ben Barton, who I really like, but I think he's just more of a kind of a physical presence to hold the line of scrimmage. I don't know if he's going to go in and beat a block, rip past somebody, split a double team, force a fumble. The really, really good teams have a couple guys on the defensive line that beat blocks, that beat schemes, that are just good enough that you have to coach around, that you have to account for in all plays. I'm not sure if this Badgers defensive line, this group has that. So that would be my biggest concern, that in the biggest moments, we're still out-talented. And until some of our younger pieces come to the speed, I think that is potential concern. Biggest reason to tune into the TV for this positional group. To me, I've talked about Perkins a lot, so Perkins would be an answer here, but I want to go to something else. I think it's some of the younger talent coming up. Like, I'm excited to see what Dylan Johnson looks like year 2. I'm excited to see if Jamel Howard has turned the corner. It's a few things like that. I want to see those pieces as they grow and develop, because that's what we've always loved about college football anyway. It's the development, it's the growth, it's watching players ascend from year to year, right? On the escalator of success. How are they getting better? Yes, I saw him as a freshman, now as a sophomore, now as a junior. You just love that growth that players have, and you grow with them as a fan, and you enjoy them, and you kind of see that progression they have. It's a lot of fun as a fan. So I'm excited to see what Jamel Howard might be able to do in some limited snaps this year, Dylan Johnson this year. And then obviously, like I said, Charles Perkins is a guy I'm very excited to see. Who is your favorite all-time Badgers defensive lineman? All these previews we talk about, who are your favorite Badgers at these spots? I'm going to go with Keanu Benton. Listen, I think there's several guys you can hit here, right? You can do a Hawthorne, you can do a Erasmus James, you could do obviously a J.J. Watt, you could do a Isaiah Loudermilk, Matt Henningsen, Matt Shaughnessy, right? As these names just rattle off my brain. But I think it's Keanu Benton for me. Just the most underrated in-state kid coming into the class, and then immediately like, oh, this is a freshman that's going to start right away at nose tackle in the Big Ten. Like, what? What are we talking about? And then games against Ohio State where he would just whip Ohio State's offensive lineman, and even games where we would get manhandled, you'd be able to say, well, yeah, but man, that Benton kid, he's really good. So obviously a part of the Steelers. Yeah, Benton, I just love that dude. I loved how he played, Mr. Consistent, and he was just a rock in the middle of a bunch of really good defenses for us. Let me know who your favorite Badgers defensive lineman is. This is the Badgers defensive line preview. Let me know if you think I got anything wrong, if I missed anything, what your grades are, all of that and more. Let me know in the chat. We'll loop back and answer those questions on Wisconsin. Appreciate you guys and gals so much on Wisconsin, and we will definitely talk later.